We knew that in the cities there were magnificent houses for the whites and crumbling huts for the blacks. That blacks were not admitted to cinemas, nor to restaurants, nor to European shops. That blacks traveled at the feet of the white in his luxury cabin.
On June 30th, 1960, Patrice Lumumba stood up and said what no African leader had dared to say in front of their colonizers. And today, you're going to understand why the West made sure he wouldn't live to see his next birthday. Because this wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration of war against an empire that had stolen everything.
Congolese men and women fighters for independence on behalf of the Congolese government. To all of you, my friends, who have tirelessly fought by our side, I ask you to make this June 30th, 1960, a memorable date that you will keep indelibly engraved in your heart, a date whose significance you will proudly teach your children, so that they in turn will make known to their sons and grandsons the glorious history of our struggle for freedom, to end the humiliating slavery that was imposed on us by force. This determined our fate for 80 years of colonial rule. Our wounds are still too fresh and too painful for us to be able to erase them from our memory.
For 80 years, Congo wasn't a country, it was a crime scene. Under Belgian King Leopold, millions died in forced labor camps. Hands were cut off if rubber quotas weren't met. Women were held hostage to force men to work, and children grew up watching their parents beaten in the streets. This wasn't history, this was yesterday for the Congolese people standing in that crowd. The Belgians called it civilization. They built themselves statues and wrote books about bringing progress to Africa, but they never mentioned the 10 million bodies it took to fill their pockets with rubber, ivory, and diamonds.
We experienced the mockeries, the insults, the blows we had to endure morning, noon, and night because we were Negroes.
By 1960, the pressure was too much. Independence movements were spreading across Africa, and Belgium couldn't hold on anymore. So they agreed to hand over power. But here's the trick. They wanted a ceremony, a polite handshake, a grateful thank you from the Congolese for being freed. King Baudouin of Belgium flew in for the ceremony and gave a speech praising his ancestors for bringing peace and prosperity to Congo. He expected Lumumba, the new prime minister, to smile and play along. Lumumba had other plans. Watch what happens next, because what you're about to hear wasn't in the script. It wasn't approved, it was pure fire. Lumumba steps up to the microphone, looks directly at the king, and starts talking about slavery, about whippings, about humiliation. He says they lived through mornings, afternoons, and evenings filled with tears, fire, and blood. He says Congolese people were treated worse than animals, and that the wounds are still too fresh to be erased from memory. Then he says the line that made every colonizer in that room freeze. We are no longer your monkeys, not slaves, not subjects, not your experiment. He strips away every lie they told themselves about their mission. He's not asking for freedom, he's taking it, and he's doing it while staring them down. He keeps going. He talks about the land that was stolen, the forced labor, the different laws for white people and black people, the insults, the beatings at noon in front of watching masters. And then he says something that sends chills. We have known that the law was never the same depending on whether it dealt with a white or a black. This wasn't a history lesson, this was an accusation, in front of diplomats, in front of cameras, in front of the entire world. But here's where it gets powerful. He doesn't just talk about pain, he pivots. He says, we are going to show the world what the black man can do when he works in freedom and equality. That sentence is both a threat and a promise. He's saying, we don't need you, we never did. You held us back, now watch what happens when you're not standing on our necks. The room was silent. The Belgian officials were furious. This was supposed to be a celebration, not a courtroom. But Lumumba didn't care. He had torn off the mask. He had said out loud what everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. And that's exactly why he had to die. Less than 7 months later, Lumumba was arrested. The CIA had been watching him. They called him a communist threat. Belgium wanted him gone. Local rivals were paid off, and in January 1961, Patrice Lumumba was tortured and killed. His body was dissolved in acid so there would be no grave, no shrine, no memory. But they made a mistake because his words didn't die with him.
Who will finally forget the shootings where so many of our brothers perished? The dangers were those who no longer wanted to submit to the regime of injustice, oppression, and exploitation were ruthlessly thrown.
In his last letter to his wife Pauline, he wrote this: "History will one day have its say. It will not be the history that Brussels, Paris, Washington, or the United Nations will teach. It will be the history that they will teach in the countries emancipated from colonialism and its puppets, a history of glory and dignity." He knew he was going to die, and he knew why. Because he refused to be quiet, because he refused to let them rewrite the story. Now, here's the part that should make you angry. How much did you learn about Patrice Lumumba in school? Probably nothing, maybe a sentence in a textbook if you were lucky. But you learned about European kings, about American presidents, about wars that defended freedom. They don't teach Lumumba because his story asks too many uncomfortable questions. Why did the CIA help kill a democratically elected leader? Why did Belgium cover it up for decades? Why is Congo still one of the poorest countries on earth even though it has trillions of dollars worth of minerals in the ground? Because independence on paper means nothing if your resources are still being stolen. If your leaders are still being controlled, if your people are still dying while someone else gets rich. This is happening right now. Cobalt for your phone batteries, coltan for your laptops, diamonds, gold, copper. All of it is coming out of Congo, and the people there are still living in poverty while corporations make billions. Lumumba warned us. He said freedom isn't just a flag and a national anthem, it's control over your own land, your own future, your own dignity. That speech in 1960 was a mirror, and the reflection was so ugly that they had to break it. But the cracks are still there. Every time a Western country talks about bringing democracy to Africa while funding dictators, every time they offer loans with conditions that trap countries in debt, every time they act shocked that Africans are angry, Lumumba's voice is in all of that, still asking the same question. When will you stop lying? This isn't ancient history, this is the blueprint. Every revolutionary who came after him studied this moment, and every movement for real independence has used his words as fuel. Because he didn't beg, he didn't negotiate, he stood up and said the truth, even though he knew it would cost him everything, and it did. So what do we do with this? We remember, we share, we make sure his name doesn't disappear into footnotes, because they want you to forget. They want this to be a sad story from the past that has nothing to do with today. But it has everything to do with today, every single thing. If this made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to hear it.